Hello, podcast listeners and viewers, the thousands and thousands of you that I know are out there, and welcome to Unlearning Out Loud. I'm Mike Lee, and we have Melissa Sadorf. As always, we're super excited to be here. Melissa, how you doing today?
Actually, it's been a fantastic day. I'm really glad to be back and talking about another thing that we can unlearn together. I think we got some good stuff today that we can talk about.
Well, I think you're spot on. Do you really mean that you're really excited to be here today, or is that just something you feel like you should say since you're being recorded?
No, it's always good to have a conversation with you, Mike.
Well, and for those people who aren't waiting with bated breath on release dates, this is being recorded the day after Thanksgiving. And so, are you shaking off a turkey coma by any chance today?
No, we had turkey, but it was rather crispy. Yeah, my son was
not like air fryer crispy, but bad.
No, crispy. It was oil crispy. You know fry the turkey.
Oh, deep fried turkey.
Yeah, it was rather well done. We'll put it that way. It was rather well done. But we also had a ham, so that there was some meat on the table that was not crunchy.
Well, you know what I always say? It's always good to have a backup pig.
Yes, there you go.
You never know when you'll need a backup pig, so that's a smart move.
We had our backup pig, and it was very, very tasty.
Yeah, because if your turkey comes out tasting like something that would have been served at Buffalo Wild Wings, then you might want to fall back on your backup pig. Well, as I just mentioned, the holidays are now, I guess, technically officially on us because it's the day after Thanksgiving, 2025.
Ooh, Black Friday. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
Not a shopper, so.
Yeah.
Are you going shopping today?
No, shopping maybe for lunch and a little bit in my own refrigerator is probably about the extent of it. Maybe I'll do some online stuff because there might be some good deals out there. I think there are, but I've already been racking up deals because they start Black Friday like way in advance anymore. Yeah. So they start everything way in advance.
Yeah, they do.
The holidays. I'm pretty sure I just saw Easter stuff for.
I have no doubt. There was Valentine's candy in the grocery store.
Oh yeah, no.
Seriously.
Remind me sometime on a future pod to talk about my Valentine's Day candy / Target days. It's a horrifying tale.
Okay, I will make a note.
Halloween. Well, so speaking of holidays, how do you fall on this whole listening to holiday music thing? Is it okay to listen before Thanksgiving or is it after Thanksgiving?
Honestly, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I would rather just get Thanksgiving out of the way and start listening to Christmas music after Thanksgiving.
Well, where I come from, Christmas season didn't start until, pretend Santa landed that sleigh on the float at the Macy's parade. Like you were all in on Thanksgiving. And then that guy shows up and then it was like, okay, you now all have license to be Christmassy, celebrate the holiday season. So I've yet to get used to this whole idea that you can start playing Christmas music right after you put away your Halloween decorations. But call me old fashioned. What can I say? Well, speaking of holiday music, I just thought, do you have any holiday albums you like to listen to? Because I do. I got a couple.
I like Bing Crosby. I have one of his old, and it's just Bing sings Christmas music, and I love it. I've listened to that since I was in college.
I love that you just clarified that you have one of Bing's old records as opposed to one of his newer releases. But Bing Crosby just drips Christmas, right? For sure. You hear that voice, you think Christmas, even if it's in July. So for those of you out there listening, I have a couple that you might find a little unusual. I'll share one today and I'll share one in our next pod.
Okay.
Today it's by an artist by the name of J.D. McPherson. And J.D. McPherson's got a bit of a Chuck Berry 50s style rock and roll thing going on. He's a fantastic artist, the kind of person you can, he's got enough edge to him to where you can have cool kids over and listen to him. But you can also have, somebody who just does nothing but listen to Bing Crosby albums all day and they come over and listen to him too. I love J.D. McPherson, puts on a great show. He has an album called Sock. And it's a Christmas album. And the song Socks is hilarious. It's basically him pouting about, I'm excited about Christmas and he got socks. And so highly recommend J.D. McPherson's holiday album, Socks. Check it out. It is on Spotify. And no, I'm not getting a kickback because you'd have to have people who are really tuning into this program for us to monetize anything. So
True.
Just us talking, just a couple friends and as always, Mom. Hi, Mom. So what else is going on in your world in the month of December there, Melissa?
Well, I'm taking this December as kind of a reset. Yeah, I'm heading down to Mexico. My husband and I are going to be going down to Puerto Vallarta and
Ooh.
putting some space between urgency and importance. I'm going to plan on morning walks on the beach without my phone, reading a book from start to finish. Actually, haven't done that for a while. And then just kind of doing a hard stop on anything that isn't mission critical.
Nice. Well, if you see Morgan Freeman on the beach sanding his boat.
I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, if you see either of them on the boat, that's get busy living, get busy dying stuff. So there's your random Shawshank Redemption.
There you go.
Mention. Well, yeah, that sounds like a great time. So good for you. It's go get your shopping done as fast as possible online.
Yeah, exactly right.
So,
and the other thing, you talk about music. I really love. My favorite movie of all time is It's a Wonderful Life. And so I now have an opportunity to watch that on repeat during the month of December. I love that movie.
That's a all-time classic. Every time a bell rings,
an angel gets his wings.
Yes. Yeah. I loved everyone in that movie, but that kid got a little irritating. I think it was the way she said it. I don't know. It's just like, you little brat. Everybody
does that. Zuzu? You didn't hate Zuzu?
No, I didn't. Zuzu was fine. She was fine until she opened her mouth and started talking about angels and wings and lecturing everybody about her mythology around angels, which flew in the no pun intended, but flew in the face of everything that I had learned from my religious dogma. I've never heard such a thing. I don't recall that being a thing, but it was a nice touch for the movie. So speaking of music, aren't you wondering?
I would love to know what's the shirt today?
All right, this one's a little different. I'm mixing it up a little bit. You ready?
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll get it or not.
Despite Rage in the Cage. Oh no, rat.
Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. Smashing Pumpkins?
No, I know. I'm so lame.
I've
just exposed that I'm not the cool 80s kid that I thought I was.
No, this is early 90s. So
even worse.
You were cool in the 80s, but you must have shut it off come 91.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I wore this today because I know there's a lot of Smashing Pumpkins fans out there, still a hugely popular band. And Billy Corgan and the band, this album that had so many big hits off of it, like 1979 and Tonight and all these things, he has worked with the Chicago Symphony, and they have redone the album in a symphonic piece that's supposed to be incredible, just debuted this past week. So, check it out. I think there's bits and pieces of it turning up online, but it's supposed to be pretty neat.
Interesting. Okay, so I will brush up on my Smashing Pumpkins. Sorry to be your lame friend.
Well, no, I think if you heard Tonight or 1979, you'd know right away.
Yeah, I'm sure I would.
Anyway, so hey, guess what?
What?
Yeah, we have a topic.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I think is really important for listeners to note is that we're not always here to say this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is what was wrong, this is what. We're here to explore those questions, right? It's about exploring the questions. And sometimes we might think we have an answer. Sometimes we think we might not. Normally, the answer is far too complicated. And today, I think it qualifies as one of those really, if you're tuning into the pod, I think you'll have something to talk about with your friends, family, while you're playing Bing Crosby in the background and see what you think. And this topic today is really about history. Whether we've gotten it right in terms of how we look at history, how we study it, how we learn about it, and maybe most importantly, how we frame it just day to day and how it's tucked away in our minds. And I one of the things that keeps popping into my head is, you've probably heard a million times, why is it that we study history? Mm-hmm. I mean, the old adage, we study history so that we can avoid negative repeats and positively influence today and tomorrow, right? That kind of idea. But my question to the audience and to you would be, as Dr. Phil would say, does anyone, just a reflective question for the audience is, does anyone think that we'd be doing anything differently in this moment if we hadn't taken a single history class, hadn't read a single book about history, hadn't seen a single document about history? How might we be acting differently without that background? And if the answer is, I'm not sure it would be that different, that says we've got a lot to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about today, right? I know you've had an interesting expression in the past about about studying. And what was it you always said? We study, we don't really study it, but we
curate it. So my thing about history is that we don't actually learn history because it is highly curated. We keep the parts that flatter us and ignore the parts that would change us. And I think that that's why some of those patterns that we read about will just reappear in different time periods with different costumes. So, what I would encourage people to think about also is, are we studying history, or are we learning about things that have happened in the past to feel right about our side? Or are we trying to inform how we respond and react next week? And so to overlay that perspective on top of why we study it at all.
Haven't we gotten to the place, I think I've noticed this more and more, not just with history, but where everything that comes on the news is instantly like, how can this become part of my ammunition for my argument? Right. And so, and when we've said many times, this is not a political show. We're not here to talk politics. We are here to talk about people and leave things up to the listener to explore those a little bit. And as a matter of fact, that reminds me, I have an idea for a new segment. I should have warned you.
Ooh, okay.
Before we got on quote unquote the air, and calling it loop back. And loop back is where we would think, we talked about something before. Have you noticed this turn up in life since we did our podcast, right? So for example, on the attribution bias conversation, I had something happen the other day, and we'll come back to it. And I was like, I just caught myself doing the whole attribution bias thing. So that's why you don't need us we're not here to, we're not prophets, right? We're here to just point things out. And then if you do the homework of noticing, you'll start to find it pretty fascinating how many times that you might find it validating of the content, right? So this idea around history is, yes, the curation part. And we're going to go even a little bit deeper though. And I said that about politics because I don't want anybody to get the impression, oh boy, here we go. This is going to be about, if this person won history, they're going to shape it this way. And now we're going to get spoon-fed an entirely different story. That's not where we're going to spend a lot of our time, even though that's definitely a conversation. But what we're going to spend our time today is really talking a little bit about, are we thinking deeply enough about history? Are we spending enough time in some of the drivers of history rather than the event, right? The event and move on. And that's where I think our role around education and our conversation around education, which will be a part of this a little bit, has a place, right? So I would pose this question to you, Melissa, and I think I already know the answer, but when you think about conflicts, let's just start with historical conflicts, right?
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Do you, do you notice a natural inclination? Because I know I do, to think of civil war. Actually, let me stop myself, right? I'm going to say a few conflicts, and I want the audience to stop and ask themselves, do you picture the good guy, right? So Civil War, Revolutionary War, Cold War, World War II, World War I. It's instantaneous, right? Like, did you have an image of what you perceived to be the good guy throughout?
Yeah, Civil War, the good guys were the Union and the bad guys were the Confederacy. And it was all about ending slavery. With the Cold War, obviously, it's democracy and the free world versus communism and the evil empire. And so that's the US and Russia. That's certainly something that I think people can relate to. The last major world war, World War II, you had the good war allies versus the Axis. That was the three. There were very clear moral stakes. We defeated fascism during World War II. So we were the good guys. They were the bad guys.
Right. Yeah. And I know those people who've hung around this longer probably think, oh, yeah, here we go. We're going to talk about how, you're not going to try to sell me that the Germans were the good guys, right? Or that the Union forces weren't, on the side of right and wrong when it came to slavery. And that's not what we're here to talk about, actually, believe it or not. It's not a question of that. That's another conversation for people to have. And depending on where you live and the country you live in, I think we all have pretty clear understanding of, of what we would consider to be the right side and the wrong side of some. And I chose a real benchmark conflicts, right? Like these aren't trick questions. And so it lends itself pretty well for our conversation. But you might say, well, that's not very nuanced. Well, it's not. But what's interesting about it is when we think about these events, the war itself, for example, or the something that happened in history, are we thinking about how it happened or just that it happened?
Mm.
And so, we talked in a prior episode about, well, we alluded to a book that you and I both love, right? Thinking Fast and Slow, and which is built on tons of research around how, the brain is this energy conservation device that is trying to make decisions with as little, literally, effort as possible, right? It's why we can become fodder for online, campaigns and, the whole 9 yards. And it's not that it's a bad thing, it's a survival thing, right? And so, economists know this, marketing experts know this, everyone understands that this is not some sort of, we're not going to deeply consider everything that we take a position on, right?
Yep.
So this idea that you're now walking, a lot of what we'll talk about on this pod are things that fit into that box of how did it happen? Well, sometimes it's happened because that's our natural inclination, right? The quickest solution, right? Does that ever happen to you where you feel like you go straight to the quickest solution? I think we've talked about it before.
Absolutely. It's the easiest thing. I can take that off my list and move on. I'm saving time. I'm saving headspace. I'm saving anxiety.
Yep. And God knows we've got plenty of anxiety and not plenty. I know I don't have plenty of headspace to go around. So I can't be blowing it on just, random things. So so where I'm headed with this is, how often did we ever say to ourselves, okay, so World War II, let's take World War II as an example, because it really is one of the clearest examples of right and wrong for the most part, right? There's a lot of nuance there that we don't study and we don't have time to study it. I get it. But when it comes to Nazis and Nazi Germany and anti-Semitism, that's a pretty clear right and wrong. So it makes a great example. But the question that I don't find us asking is, so how did that happen? Not how did it happen? We have this narrative of always good guys, bad guys. And that's why I brought up the good guy, bad guy conversation, right? Because if I can just say good guy, bad guy, I can put it away and tuck it in the corner, right? Right? It's an energy saver. And so it's really easy to take something that's really complicated and actually should be enlightening us more than it is and turn it into flatten it, right? If that makes sense, and flatten it, because really I'm studying World War II, and maybe in my history class, I had to learn, these battles happened and these generals conducted them. And, Winston Churchill did this and Winston Churchill did that. And right, we've all been there for that. Yeah. But how much time have we spent actually diving into what's the real question of World War II? Well, what happened, right? Obviously, is part of it. That belongs in a well-rounded understanding of history. But how is it that arguably at the time, the most out front in terms of, and I don't use this term in terms of modern American politics, I'm using the word liberal, right, in terms of the way it's originally intended to be used, which is this idea of moving forward with your, so coming from a deep European country that has a history of, when you're coming from monarchy and, all these other things, the idea that it was progressive or liberal was an idea that you were moving towards democracy, right? It's become so recently different, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, at the time, Germany there wasn't a whole lot more out there in terms of a government that was moving towards, modernization. It was the hotbed of arts and culture and freedom of expression. I mean, there was a lot happening in Germany. Now, again, we don't want to flatten Germany itself into a singular, like this monolith of everybody in Germany was the same, because they weren't, right? There's all kinds of deep dives you can do there too about, where was the support for Hitler coming from? Was it all coming, and was Berlin as supportive as Munich, and was Munich as supportive as the countryside? I mean, those are questions that are worth asking. But the question is, the real question that should be driving us crazy, or we should be enjoying asking, is, how did this country that was at this place within years become what many would consider to be the poster child for evil of the 20th century?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's where I have found myself, wondering is how is it if we don't think our understanding of history is driving a positive trends in behavior, then how so? Right. So we've got this idea of, I want to know who the good guys and bad guys are. I want to drop them in a box. And if I can do that, that flattens the conversation and I can move on. If the redcoats were the evil British, right? And that is a more nuanced conversation. If you talk about the Revolutionary War, it's not World War II. There was a lot more going on, right? But in my mind, the redcoats were the bad guys. That's just what happened, right? So am I making sense so far?
Yeah, you are. I mean, what that leads me to think about is, you loop back to attribution bias. And if we cast our group as the good guys with noble motives, whether we're very fully informed or not, there are things that are context and pressure and impossible constraints that need to be taken into account. But if we're the good guys and the other guys on the other side become the bad actors, they have bad intent. There's a very binary way of thinking. And we've talked about that. If we don't name the bias that is inherent in binary thinking, when it comes to complex situations like these things can be, we're never going to see shared constraints that we could actually potentially fix. Or we're never going to see the entirety of a scenario or a situation because we blind ourselves to it.
Right. And even, like that is 100% correct. But also you can, again, for those in the audience that are listening for us to start, America bashing or something, that's not what we're doing, because I'll give you a great example. In Germany itself, as you know, I was in Germany last year or a year and a half ago, and it is the embarrassment and disdain that Germany itself generally has for its own history and its role in World War II, right, is palpable to the point that they're not going to have, statues of, an SS officer sitting in it, right? Like this is not going to happen. And they don't even they'll talk about it just enough to try to make sure it doesn't happen again kind of thing. But that's not how they roll. But even from a German perspective, where you're obviously making a strong case that was wrong. That was bad behavior, right? To say the least. They're not doing themselves a service they're doing the exact same thing, but they're putting themselves in the bad guy box, right?
Yeah.
Which flattens them as much as it does. And again, if you had to go to a box during World War II, we would put little Adolf and all the rest of his little minions in the bad guy box. So hear me when I'm saying, the audience, that I'm not saying that this isn't about whether Nazi. That's a really good example of it's pretty clear who was in the right or wrong, right? This is an example of, are you missing an opportunity to understand how you got there? How did we? And if I can just dismiss it as, well, Grandpa was, he's a bigot and he hated Jews. And so I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff because we're past that. We're past that. And the answer is, well, we've been past that before. And guess what? We end up back there again. Right. So the question is, how is it that you can look at something and say, if we're talking about the Civil War, I remember asking my sixth graders one time just to throw them a curveball. So we've talked about this Mason-Dixon line, right? And so this group, the North has been relegated as the good guys, the South back. And if you were born north of that line, there's a very strong probability you're fighting in the Union, right? If you're born South, you're probably there's a very strong probability you're fighting for the South and relegated to the good guy, bad guy box of history. So it's just probability that determined whether you were the good guy or bad guy. Where did you happen to get, birthed, to use a somewhat creepy verb? It's just, that word's always given me issues. I don't know. That word is it's just not right. That word. I don't like it. But anyway, I used it. So it's my own fault. So this idea, and I posed that to kids, and there was a whole lot of, And next thing you know, 12-year-olds were having some pretty deep conversations about it.
Yeah. What are the odds that somebody who ends up a bad guy, it's because they were born a few miles south of the Mason-Dixon line, to your point, or across the French border in 1920. Right. And you I think it's easy to wrestle with the fact that geography and an era that you are born in kind of load the dice, whether it's economics or media or religion or schools or neighbors. I mean, none of that absolves choices, of course, but it does explain conditions. And if we are only taking a look at character and we ignore conditions, we actually miss some of those levers that could actually be moved today, whether it's incentives or narratives or who gets to define normal.
Right.
And so, the question might then become what current conditions are quietly shaping us in ways that we're going to regret later, and who benefits if we don't ask.
Right. Or what are we doing that history might imply that we're on the right track over, right? Yep. So it can go either way, right? So it's this idea of informed actions. And, we'll dive into this in another episode, but the idea of, of choice and probability, it's fascinating because ultimately math is a thing. And so, and we talked about attribution bias before, and it's a version of that because what we like to do, again, so that we can move on, right? Just move on, is right. We'll have this sense in our heads that, well, yeah, my neighbors, if we'd been born in the South, they would have all been fighting for the Confederacy, but not me, right? I'd be the outlier because, let's say 20% did the right thing. And well, guess what? Everybody thinks they're part of the 20% that would have done the right thing. And the fact is the math would not substantiate that. It's like impossible to be true. So the question isn't, would you or your neighborhood or your family have been supportive of the South in the Civil War? It's how many of you would have been supported. It's not about how many even, because you can look at those numbers historically. It's about which. If I got 10 of you in a room, and I know that out of every 10 people in the South, 70, I'm just making up a number here. I didn't do, good. I didn't plan on necessarily going down that path, but out of every 10 people, 7 or 8 were fully supportive of consistently, and again, I'm flattening it. There's geography, there's areas that were stronger. Like I get it. That's the whole point of this episode, right? Is that it's more complicated than that. But when you do boil it down to the idea of, look, the reality is out of every 10, I can put you and your family, your neighborhood or whoever in a box, and I'm not going to argue with you whether or not 7 of them are going to come out supporting the Confederacy. I'm going to ask you, show me the 7, right? So that I can tag them as the bad guy. And I'm not going to ask any questions about anything because I can put them in the box and I can move on.
Right.
Right. So that, and unlearning there, people might say, well, what's the unlearning? Well, the unlearning is it's not that simple. Right. And that we've been conditioned over time to believe that things can be simplified to the point of, so you can get it to the box, the good box or the bad box, right? So the unlearning is, there's always more questions to be asked. And I know one of the things you like to ask, Melissa, when, like when we're doing pre-show conversation is, because it's both our backgrounds, is, well, what about education, right? Did we get it wrong in education? Did every one of us who are listening to the show or watching the show or currently teaching kids or whatever, did they get exposed to a curriculum or instruction that didn't serve them well, right? And I think the answer to that is yes and no, right?
Talk about that.
Well, funny you should ask. I'd love to. I appreciate the invitation. And so what people don't know about me who don't know me is that you could drop off this call and I'd still be talking. So I'm in my own little, but I do appreciate so here's some things we've gotten right? And I know some people might say, there's things we need to know what happened. We need to know that, I hate to keep going back to World War II, but Hiroshima just jumped into my mind. We need to know about that happening, right? But facts are good. That's not, no one is debating whether history class should include facts, right? Or this is what actually happened. Although, to your point earlier, we do need to be mindful about who is identified and passed on the fact book, right?
Yep.
And that's
who wrote the history,
right? And that's where historians, people who are professionally trained in history, who really do this for a living. And I know that, sometimes expertise gets a bad rap. People are like, oh, what do they know? Right? Like I have the internet, I can find out myself. It's not that easy. And I think as you know, I've got a bit of an obsession right now with middle-aged England. And I love how these historians, I'm reading multiple books on the same topics, and how these historians have managed to piece together a narrative. And they basically frame it as, this is likely, this is the story that was, it's very improbable, and here's why. although we can't say for sure, right? Like it's messy. History is messy, and historians have to do a lot of work and a lot of combing through archives and reading every single stinking note and every little thing to try to construct what might have happened. And so I know we sometimes want a clean answer, but sometimes these are things we can guarantee happen. We can triangulate it, right? Those kinds of things. So the question is, what happened is is obviously something we have to ask. And if we know those answers and they're well established fact, and we've got great, first person sources, that sort of thing, we can triangulate them. We'll do another episode in the future on, pushing back on the idea of it's so hard to know what's true, right? And it kind of is parallel to this conversation. But facts are a good thing if we can determine what those are, or just say, this is what we think happened, and this is how sure we are of it, right? So, and it's really interesting that, there's people that actually even do that with, there's academics who actually meet and they do it around religion, who's, experts in, say, ancient, Judaism or whatever, and who will comb through, biblical stories and say, this was highly unlikely to have happened. This is why this was triangulated as absolutely having happened, like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so strategy that gets applied is not necessarily about the black and white of did it happen or didn't. But anyway, so this idea that, that we shouldn't shy away from facts and just be talking all about, well, you don't need to know all the battles of the Civil War, but what you need to know is that America is a racist country. Again, I'm not trying to go into politics, right? And as a matter of fact, I'm using that example as the precise pushback on that idea, right? Those are still definitive and declarative statements, right? Whether you're saying we were racist, we weren't racist, we are racist, we weren't right? Like those, we can go on all day with that conversation. And really, the place that I do feel like education may have gone sideways in both efforts, with both fact-based and, the deeper dive stuff, which is noble effort. I applaud, I know you did too, this idea of taking kids deeper than surface level information, really exploring. But in the end, we still were prescribing what they needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
There was no exploration around that. I mean, sometimes, don't get me wrong, and there are, again, this always varies on who the teacher is we're talking about, right? Master teachers can just weave in and out of this. It's a thing of beauty to watch.
Yep.
Right? But as written, right, the history curriculum is still led to a very prescribed place, in my opinion. It has a lot to do with the fact that we want to be able to test them on it. And how do I test them on an open-ended question? That's really hard, right? Like and so there's this demand for, assessment. And so it can influence us in other ways. So facts are good. Causes are good. It's fine to say we need to be mindful of, if I'm in German and I'm writing curriculum in Germany, which would be terrible because it'd all be in English because I don't speak German. But if I were writing curriculum in German, having an intention of my history curriculum, sending a message loud and clear that what happened with the Nazis in Germany was not good and it's unacceptable. But I'm doing a disservice by not exploring, instead of just taking them straight to the moral judgment, right? Mm-hmm. Having the conversation to get there, right? To talk about, and how did we go from no one might have guessed before, and it's this whole confluence of economics and anti-Semitism and a history of this and a history of that and the repression and the fact that they were burning money for the, and then here comes this guy saying this, that, and the other thing. Well, when you allow yourself the space to dive into that sort of stuff, that allows kids and families to come to some of their own conclusions, because there's nothing made me happier as a teacher and principal than when a parent would say, man, thanks a lot, Lee, but we had a conversation I wasn't planning on spending an hour on. Lets me know but my kid came home saying, Dad, what about blah, 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 right? Like, because it's open-ended and they want to explore it with the family more. And you and I both would always, in public education, we always take that's a great question for your parents. Talk about that.
Yep.
Right? You got up at home. That was like the greatest thing in the world for them to bring that stuff at home. And it allows and this is why I feel that there's a dual responsibility for how we got here. Part of it is the education system, right? The flattened out version of history, but it's well intentioned. But it's this history, and our sense of history is not, it fits in schools and then everyone else is hands off. Right? You ever see those on a heavy carton, like you go to IKEA. Are you an IKEA person?
Not if I can help it.
Oh, wow.
I'm not into building things that have miles of directions.
Oh, that's what they pride themselves in. There's just like,
No, I know. And
like,
everything comes in these nice, neat little boxes, and
all you need is a rubber
one
mallet.
of those, right? Or one of those little
things. Yeah. So, but way to offend all of Sweden. There goes our audience.
Sorry.
There.
I'm sure that it's, it's for somebody else besides me. It would drive me crazy.
Well, the reason I make that is on the side of the box. It doesn't and it doesn't have to just be IKEA. It happens everywhere. On the side of the boxes, you see that whole, heavy box, and it shows two happy people lifting it together, keeping their back straight and their legs, right? They're lifting with their legs, and basically that image shows you want to lift this with someone else, right? Like, this isn't a pick it up by yourself. That's something as important as history instruction is. It should be a joint effort, right? Between families, between public education system, families asking of the public education and private education system, asking for more robust instruction, right? Because ultimately, most schools are they're service entities that are providing what's being asked or demanded of them, right? That's why there's a lot of things that we know we could do better that have not gotten off the ground if that's not something that's really in demand with the community. So one of the things, and I thought a lot about this because there's no good answer, and I know we've talked about this in the lead up to the show, is, well, what do you do about it? And that's the $1 million question, right? And I don't know if we talk about schools, let's talk about what that might look like, right? Maybe you don't change much of your curriculum, right? Maybe you do keep it. But what about the introduction of a parallel track, right? That isn't about the this is right, this is wrong, the untestable parallel track, right? That is more about student self-directed inquiry. That doesn't have prescribed answers, right? Like, there may be a sense of what the right answer is, right? And so you ask a group of kids, do you think a kid born south of the Mason-Dixon line would have a better moral compass just because they were born in Ohio versus being born in Kentucky? And I know people will say, oh, kids can't do that. And I would be the first to say, and I know you'd be right there with me because we've talked about it.
Yes, they can. Absolutely, they can.
Yeah. And even if a student struggles with the complexity of questions like that, maybe they will. But the exposure to the fact that these are what an educated populace would talk about. Right. So maybe I'm not ready for that today. Maybe I'm not ready for it 6 months from now, but I understand that this is important. And these are the types of questions I'm going to be faced with, not just, can I regurgitate a bunch of facts, right? Or are my parents going to quiz me on, do I know all the major generals or all the major explorers from the, Spain and Portugal, or, that kind of thing. So am I somehow still making that sense? I don't see any look of confusion on your face.
I think that you're right. You want to teach the timeline, but you also want to teach the lenses, whether it's bias or it's incentives or it's power and control. And I do appreciate the questions as outcomes, right? Grading for quality of inquiry, not just recall, and, make a question like, what did it cost to dissent? Mm-hmm. A standing prompt. And I appreciate that kind of opportunity for children to think in that way as well. Where do we see this pattern now? And where's a guardrail that would break it is also another thing. Taking it from, okay, it happened 100 years ago, but where are we seeing the same kinds of things in the world that we're living in now? And are there things context-wise or other lenses that might be important to bring into the conversation?
So. Right. I know one of the topics that comes up especially in high school conversations around, genocides in say, Africa, right? And we've all, anybody who's seen Hotel Rwanda, right? It's in tears by the end of the movie, right? Like, oh my God, I can't believe this. What a horrible thing to have happened. And instead of just covering the Rwandan genocide, and to your point, asking a parallel and often running question of, do you see similarities of this anywhere else in the world? And not about the actual genocide, not about machete attacks, but is there anything similar about Rwanda before and again, we're talking about older kids in this example, right? But
Right.
are there examples to where they can go? And Rwanda, a year before it broke out, to any other places. So pick other countries that might be, pick one country, you and your team, of a hot spot in the world right now. And here's a list. I'll give you a list of 20 of them as a teacher, whatever. Your job is to see, are there any parallels here? Should we be concerned about fill in the blank, right? You tell me, right? And obviously, if there was an exact right answer to that, they'd already be an analyst at the CIA. So that's the beauty of it. And you get kids who are motivated to go find out, because they get some choice in it, right? They've got some autonomy. But again, it's not just about schools, right? It's about parents asking those questions, like, what would you learn today? Or anybody over, just came from Thanksgiving, asking really tough questions about, that's really interesting. But, Grandpa says, I just watched this, documentary on westward expansion and and I just think, and you can push back on any direction you want, right? Like if you want to, they say, I watched this documentary on westward expansion and man, I can't believe how awful we were as an American society to just grow right in it. How awful. And, Grandpa goes off on a little, thing about westward expansion and manifest destiny. And to say, can you think of any, that's, maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, whatever, that's up to you. But to say, yeah, I always think, because so many good people were wrapped up in that, I wonder what could have motivated someone to support that sort of behavior? Because clearly there had to have been some good people that were on board with that, right? So what, and not just dismiss them. We're not looking, well, it was the times, right? That's not the point. Because again, what is that? That's an easy exit. That's the off-ramp. Those things it's different now, right? It's not about that. It's about having a conversation that might be uncomfortable because you can't, that topic is a hot potato that you can't get a hold of to put into a box. And to be okay with walking away, having this dialogue that doesn't necessarily sometimes have an answer, but because you had the joy of experiencing history rather than being tested through history, being, having to memorize history. And some people like it. I always enjoyed history, but some people it's just like, oh God, that's the class I couldn't wait to get out of so I could get to math or, whatever it is. But is that, we talk a lot about how do we spark curiosity? And this is one of the ways you can do that, right? Is to leave the door open for heavier conversations that aren't set up to get the response you want, right? Like, I'm not going to say to Grandpa at Thanksgiving, I want him to come to grips with this answer or that answer, so I'm going to nudge him in the direction I want. It's whatever he's saying, I might push back on it. The old devil's advocate model and say, well, I had to be more complex than that. What do you think? Right? And because anything that becomes that big of a movement, there has to be tons of nuance, right? So it's a fun conversation. And I think we've done history itself a disservice by the flattening out, right? And when you stir that, and when I say we, I mean everyone, all ages, not schools, not teachers, right? I think teachers quite often are doing the best they can with what they've got and what the demands currently are. But I think that there's a lot of room for us as a society, right? As a politically engaged people or as a historically engaged people, or just somebody that loves to sit and watch the History Channel.
There you go. And if I may, I think that there's some leadership lessons to take away from here as well, not just educational leaders, but any leaders where, in an era where we know that there are things that people disagree on, if we can design for dissent, I think that we serve ourselves pretty well. Where if we as leaders create low risk ways to challenge groupthink, and maybe it's an anonymous pulse check, or it's a report on your subunits or your subcategories. Maybe it's a rotating devil's advocate in your meetings. If we interrogate incentives, so before we judge outcomes, if we do something like map who got paid, whether it's through money or status or safety, for each path, that might help us inform a different way that we view the outcome. And I think it's also important when we have these conversations, Mike, to really codify where the guardrails are, and really in a conversation with Grandpa, kind of pre-commit to lines that we don't cross for safety, and maybe making sure that as leaders, we're writing the expectations before we get into emotional conversations, and because they can turn into something that we don't want it to turn into.
Mm-hmm. I think you're spot on. And I think you're in the two different roles, the formal leadership position versus, right, the grandpa conversation, right? Like it's a lot easier to prescribe how I'm going to address my leadership cabinet, for example, or my leadership team on this is what the guardrails look like. This is where we cross the line. We're going to have a devil's advocate assigned in every meeting to automatically push back, right? That looked a lot different than how the hell do you do that with your family, right? Okay, everyone, before you pull your turkey leg, I need everyone to commit to, right?
Grandma's serving as devil's advocate this year.
Right. And so, and I'm going to push back on the manifest destiny thing. And remember, you're not supposed to take it personally, like that. Obviously that won't fly. So how do you do that? Well, there's certain ways you can approach that. And one is that if we don't work to build muscle memory on how to have those conversations without being offended, right? When you're like, I can't rely on that when I'm like, if I'm at work, that's different. But at home, if you can't suddenly launch it, like when there's no practice of that, right? When there's I've never experienced a conversation where we all disagree on something and we've done it in a positive way, right? And we've done it in a maybe it's like we're really having a great debate over it, but it has nothing to do with us as people, right? And until you have those experiences, it's hard to, have those experiences. And I think one of the great misunderstandings, I think one of the most unfortunate things that has seeped into, and this is a whole nother conversation for an unlearning, this idea of you can never talk, politics, right? Or don't talk, don't talk religion or politics, right? Or weight, right? Unless you're two, then you can say, you look fat, you get away with it. And so, but the founding fathers would cringe over that statement. It was exactly designed to be debated. Right? The whole idea of moving the union forward was through debate, not surrounding ourselves with people who think the way we think. And then if we are going to talk politics, it's a safe place because we're all wearing the same, campaign t-shirt. Yeah. And now we can just sit and reinforce each other's beliefs, right? So we have no practice in how do we talk to people who might look at things a little bit differently? And how do we not take their opinion and automatically turn that into, well, they're the bad guys, right? They're the bad guys. And that's why those conversations blow up, because it's typically, well, you're saying I'm a bad guy. No, right? That's it. But until that's something that's practiced and taught and reinforced, and that, like I said, we don't have easy answers. Yeah. Right. But the idea that you could start to say, and it's not about, I think the easiest first step at home is don't start with a declarative statement, start with a question, right? I'm not offending anyone. If Grandpa starts talking about manifest destiny and I fire back with something like, oh, they had it coming, they're a bunch of savages, right? You probably just cringed when I said that, right? Like, if that's my answer, we're blown, right? It's going to go down, right? At Thanksgiving table for sure. Regardless of right or wrong, it's going to go down. And whereas, do you think that's really interesting, Grandpa, affirming what he said? I've seen some of that stuff too. I think it's really interesting, and poking a little bit more about what you saw and then asking, like we mentioned earlier, the question, what's really interesting is how many people participated in that. Do you think, can you think of, like, why would anybody have ever supported the manifest destiny? Even if you say, I don't get it. Like, I'm with you. I don't get it. Why would they have supported that? You're still opening the door to let's try to see through the eyes of somebody that just moved out of us, right? And it's not about, again, because the gravity is, so where do I put manifest destiny? In the good box, the bad box, right? That's what people are going to want. Like, we got to settle this and put it in the box. And it may belong in the box, just like Gwyneth Paltrow's head, right? I'm not here to say that that was your obscure movie reference. Get it? Did you get that one?
No.
You've never seen Seven?
Oh, I have seen that movie. That was awful.
What's in the box? It's Gwyneth Paltrow's head. Anyway.
Yes, that's so bad.
Yeah. It's about how do we grow our ability to have conversations, even if it's something that I feel very strongly is bad. Maybe everyone on the table agrees, like, that sucked. That was a terrible thing to have happened in history, whatever the topic, right? And everyone can agree or disagree, whatever. But it's still an exercise, right? It's almost like I go to the treadmill. I go running on the treadmill at the gym. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not trying to get someplace, right? I'm exercising. I'm trying to build a muscle or a memory or lung capacity, right? We're actually getting anywhere, right? So I'm not trying to convince anybody that manifest destiny is a good thing, for example, or slavery was, like, I'm not. But what I am trying to do is run on the treadmill a little bit and give the brain an exercise, right?
Yeah, swapping the villain story for a conditioned story and being open to thinking about it differently.
Even if you think it's BS, right? Like I can swap those out all I want. Those people that was still not okay. That was still not right. Like, and we will end up there many times, but I guarantee you're going to feel a lot better about it if you get there through that kind of thought process and thinking. And like, if we truly believe something, why are we afraid to hold it up to conversation? Right. Yep. And so anyway, I think it's probably time to start to button up this unlearning takeaway. And so I would just paraphrase it as, we need to unlearn the concept of it being as simple as good guys, bad guys, no complexity, unlearn that you can test out, like you should be able to test for proficiency on World War II, right? Like, I understand World War II in and out because I passed that 20 question test that I took in whatever grade. If it was World War II, you could spend a whole life studying the origin of Nazism in Germany, right? So don't tell me you tested out of it, right? Because that gives us a false sense of, I know my history. No, you don't. You know some really shimmery spots from it, and that's about it. And then, unlearn that questions are only for tests and not for exploration, right? And so again, how do you spark curiosity? Stop making every question a test.
Yeah, I think it's a lab for seeing conditions, and instead of stopping at who is right, I think it's important to ask what incentives or fears or norms made certain choices feel inevitable, and what was the cost to dissent. I think it's interesting to keep that moral center in view, but really trade villainizing for mapping out what might have also been in play.
Right. Yeah. And again, if you come to a conclusion that is, there's certain things we can look at, very few actually, but there are certain things in history that everyone look at and go, I hope that doesn't happen again. But looping back to the beginning of this conversation, that's exactly how we continue to get back to these same, yes, at one time it's a massacre of people, the next time it's an atomic bomb, the next time, but it really is the same cycle in some ways, right? And so how do we always still end up back in the same cycle? Those indicators are all around, but if we've not taught ourselves to look for them and talk about them and discuss them and vet them, maybe I'm seeing an indicator of, hey, this looks just like fill in the blank. Well, if I say that to you, instead of just thinking it or going around other people that feel the same way, you can push back on it and go, well, Mike, have you considered the fact that, oh, crap, I didn't, I didn't even know that. Where did you learn that? Why, that's how you get collective knowledge. That's how you can't be an expert on everything, right? So that's really the unlearning for this episode. And some of the themes from this episode, we're going to touch back on because we hit on several things that are going to have their own standalone episodes. And I hope that people will tune in for those. But you know what, after that heavy conversation, I think it's time to talk about our crawls.
Oh, no. What have you got this week for me?
Well, why don't you go first? I think it's you.
My crawl?
Yeah, I think you got something up your crawl that I think is funny.
Well, meetings with no purpose. That's really what sticks in my craw. And I think we should have a new rule that if we can't write a one sentence purpose about our meeting, we should cancel it. An agenda, all great to have them. It's a promise. Who's here? Why are we here? What will exist after this meeting that didn't exist before? If it can't do that, it needs to be an email. But just put the update in an email. If it's going to be a decision, then why don't you just name the options and the constraint and who owns the call? Can we just not have a meeting to do that? So I would say let's stop, cluttering our calendars with meetings that serve no purpose.
I liked your crawl because I wanted to go first because I know that of the two crawls that we both have, that something is stuck in, that's the one that's going to resonate with everybody. My crawls tend to be strange tales from the gym locker room and that kind of thing. Like, what is wrong with him? Where that is one we've all been in that position. You know what my gripe about meetings is? I'm going to give myself a 0.5 extra crawl. I'm going to get a 1.5
Okay,
crawl.
there you go. I had 2 last time, so go for it.
There you go. I'm clawing my way back to clawing to the crawl. Is why don't we ever start a meeting at like 9:03? Why has it got to be 9 or 9:15? Like, why can't we end a meeting at 9:18? What's so damn special about 9:20, 9:30,
I
9:15?
know people tend to fill the time.
13 minutes, but I'm going to push it to third. Like, we never, it's kind of like, we have this, like, it's almost like it's magical. It's the old, so-and-so just scored his 10,000th point. We're going to have a big deal tonight, right? Because he hit 10,000 points. Right, because 9,999th point wasn't a really, really big deal. It's not a big deal till you hit 10. 10's magic number because it ends in 0. But everything else before, and then guess what? 10,001, who cares? Wake me up at 20, right? Like, we have this magical relationship with numbers that just, again, it's another learning.
Interesting, isn't it? We like nice rounded. I don't get it either. But
I did start playing with that because to be fair, that's an idea I stole from somebody in a leadership course, I'm sure, about the 9:18 or whatever. And so I actually tried that for a while, scheduling meetings that were like, I really think this is going to take till night. But I would do the duration and it would add up to like 9:23 and 9:30 instead of adding 7 minutes of around the table. I just said it's 9 to 9:23. People didn't like that very much, but they didn't like the 7 minutes of around the table either. So, I just gave up and retired.
What's your crawl? Tell me what's sticking in your crawl.
Oh, goodness, my crawl. So, good news, it's not from the gym.
Okay.
Over-the-counter medications. Would somebody tell me why in the HE double hockey sticks do they have to feel it just to no end that you can read everything on the outside of your allergy tablet bottle, right? You can read, the warning. This is how old you should be. This is who produced it. This is where it came from. This is who distributed it. This is the barcode. This is the picture of it. They can be more information than the Magna Carta on the outside of your pill bottle. But all you want to know is how many of these damn tablets am I supposed to take? Well, and what does it say? Peel back label to read directions. Why? What if I just clip my thumbnails? I don't have, what if I'm like, really? I just want to know how many freaking Benadryls I'm supposed to take. Why do I have to hoop jump this? Why can't I you have all the space right there. Why didn't you just put the damn dosage on the outside of the bottle? What are they afraid of? Somebody's going to come along and access, top secret information without buying the bottle of Benadryl?
At least you can read it. I can't even read it.
No, I think you get, I can read it once I get the stupid thing peeled back. It's just enough to dry. That's just my crawl is the size of, a small African nation. I've got that much stuff stuffed in there and I'm just feeling so good that I can start to get some of this stuff off my chest. So
I'm so glad we could help you with that, Mike.
Yeah. I think you're actually having to look around or maybe this one, me, I've got when you get backed up at the airport, you're on the runway and there's been a long delay and you see 28 Boeing jets on the runway out there waiting.
Yes.
That's my crawl list. It's a bunch of airline.
We're going to go deep, aren't we?
So, all right. So just a reminder, we're going to wrap up this episode next time. I know everyone's jonesing for our next time. And this is talk about another heavy question. I know we just did a fun one, right? So we can get a couple of heavier ones in between. Of course, we're always fun. We're going to be asking, are we really a divided nation? Or are we being divided? Or is that the same thing? So that's what we'll be talking about next time because, we love the light stuff. And we hope you'll enjoy it and you hope you'll tune in. And as always, you can find us in all the usual places, Spotify, any place you get your podcasts, the YouTube channel, you name it. I'm starting to sound like Grandpa, the YouTube. Find it on the YouTube. Find us any place. Please remember, you always have a reminder for people when they go to those sites. What should they always do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you like today's episode, make sure that you tap follow, like, and share. And please leave us a quick rating. We love 5s. It's a nice round number, right? But review on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get your shows, because it does help more people find our show. And we'd like to share the love. And also make sure if you've got a question or a pushback, that's fine too, or a story that we could unlearn together. We would really love that. So drop us a DM on LinkedIn, or if you want to leave a comment there, we'll take those too. So Thanks, Mike, for ride along today, and for you, all of you listening, for making some room in your day for us.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.